Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime.
Mark Twain, known to the passenger list of the steamer Bermudian as the Honorable Samuel L. Clemens, sailed today for the summery climes of Bermuda, in search, he said, of rest, British humor, and an opportunity to appear logical and march in a white suit. JBK2, known on the passenger list of the Viking Orion as John and Judith Keith, flew today by way of Atlanta to Hamilton, Bermuda, for a cruise around the island of Bermuda. With all passengers and crew vaccinated, wearing masks, and daily testing, they say it should be safe. We are going to risk it.
Toward the middle of the afternoon, we arrived on board the staunch steamship Bermuda with bag and baggage, and hunted for a shady place. It was blazing summer weather. The next day brought us into the midst of the Atlantic solitudes, out of smoke-colored soundings into fathomless deep blue. No ships visible anywhere over the wide ocean. By nightfall, we were far out at sea, with no land in sight. No telegrams could come here, no letters, no news. This was an uplifting thought. It was still more uplifting to reflect that the millions of harassed people on shore behind us were still suffering just as usual. I used to like the sea, but I was young then, and could easily get excited over any kind of monotony, and keep it up till the monotonies ran out. On a long sea voyage, with its eternal monotonies, people's intellects deteriorate. The mind gradually becomes inert, dull, blunted. It loses its accustomed interest in intellectual things. Nothing but horseplay can arouse it.
Oh, a cruising I will go, but not a la Disney. I will not. No urchins at sea, not for me, not for me. I take comfort in the miles and miles of undulating wrinkles wrought by time's passage on passing timers. My own can't be that bad, parenthesis, awful, can they? And then there are mounds and mounds and hills and hills and mountains of fat, tiny string trussed for poolside bakery, denizens but briefly decamped from a neighborhood double chocolate cakery. A sad sight, a weep, a sob, perchance to blubber, or the erstwhile slip of skinny trapped beneath an avalanche of lard.
Bravo. Bravo.
I have no fault to find with the manner in which our excursion was conducted. its program was faithfully carried out, a thing which surprised me, for great enterprises usually promise vastly more than they can perform. It would be well if such an excursion could be gotten up every year and the system regularly inaugurated. We had one fine sunset, a rich carmine flush that suffused the western sky and cast a ruddy glow far over the sea. Aboard ships, the world is far, far away. It has ceased to exist for you. Seemed a fading dream, along with the first days. Has dissolved to an unreality now. It is gone from your mind with all its businesses and ambitions, its prosperities and disasters, its exultations and despairs, its joys and griefs and cares and worries. They are of no concern of yours anymore. They have gone out of your life. They are a storm which has passed and left a deep calm behind. At 8 o'clock on the third morning out from New York, land was sighted. Away across the sunny waves one saw a faint dark stripe stretched along under the horizon, or pretended to see it, for the credit of his eyesight. Even the Reverend said he saw it, a thing which was manifestly not so. But I never have seen anyone who was morally strong enough to confess that he could not see land when others claimed that they could. By and by, the Bermuda Islands were easily visible. The principal one lay upon the water in the distance, a long, dull-colored body, scalloped with slight hills and valleys. We could not go straight to it, but had to travel all the way around it, 16 miles from shore, because it is fenced with an invisible coral reef. At last we sighted buoys, bobbing here and there, and then we glided into a narrow channel among them, raised the reef, and came upon shoaling blue water that soon further shoaled into pale green, with a surface scarcely rippled. And then the beautiful Bermudas rose out of the sea. We entered the tortuous channel, steamed hither and thither among the bright summer islands, and rested at last under the flag of England, and were welcome. We were not a nightmare here, where were civilization and intelligence in place of Spanish and Italian superstition, dirt and dread of cholera. So, the Reverend and I had at last arrived at Hamilton, the principal town in the Bermuda Islands. A wonderfully white town, white as snow itself, white as marble, white as flour. Yet, looking like none of these exactly. Never mind, we said. We shall hit upon a figure by and by that will describe this peculiar white. It was a town that was compacted together upon the sides and tops of a cluster of small hills. Its outlying borders fringed off and thinned away among the cedar forests, and there was no woody distance of curving coast or leafy islet sleeping upon the dimpled painted sea, but it was flecked with shining white points, half-concealed houses peeping out of the foliage. The architecture of the town was mainly Spanish, inherited from the colonists for 250 years ago. Some ragged cocoa palms, glimpsed here and there, gave the land a tropical aspect. There was an ample pier of heavy masonry. Upon this, under shelter, were some thousands of barrels containing that product which has carried the fame of Bermuda to many lands. The onion is the pride and joy of Bermuda. It is her jewel, her gem of gems. In her conversation, her pulpit, her literature, it is her most frequent and eloquent figure. In Bermuda metaphor, it stands for perfection. Perfection absolute. The Bermudian, weeping over the departed, exhausts all praise when he says he was an onion. The Bermudian, extolling the living hero, bankrupts applause when he says he is an onion. The Bermudian, setting his son upon the stage of life to dare to do for himself, comprehends all ambition when he says, be an onion. When parallel with the pier, we anchored. It was Sunday, bright and sunny. The groups upon the pier, men, youths, boys, were whites and blacks in about equal proportion. All were well and neatly dressed, many of them nattily, a few of them very stylishly. One would have to travel far before we would find another town of 12,000 inhabitants that could represent itself so respectably in the matter of clothes on a freight pier without premeditation or effort. We went ashore and found a novelty of a pleasant nature. There were no hackmen, hacks, omnibuses on the pier or anywhere about, and nobody offered his services to us or molested us in any way. I said it was like being in heaven. The Reverend, rebukingly and rather pointedly, advised me to make the most of it then. We took a long afternoon walk and soon found out that exceedingly white town was built on blocks of white coral. Bermuda is a coral island with a 6-inch crust of soil on top of it, and every man has a quarry on his own premises. Everywhere you go, you see square recesses cut into the hillsides with perpendicular walls unmarred by cracks or crevices. There is something exhilarating, even hilarious, about its vivid whiteness when the sun plays upon it. If it be a picturesque shape and graceful contour, and many of the Bermudian dwellings are, it will so fascinate you that you will keep your eyes on it until they ache. One of those snowy houses, half concealed and half glimpsed through green foliage, is a pretty thing to see. And if it takes one by surprise, and suddenly, as he turns a sharp corner of a country road, it will wring an exclamation from him sure. Wherever you go to town or country, you will find these snowy houses, and always with masses of bright colored flowers about them. The least little bit of a cottage is as white and blemishless as the stateliest mansion. Nowhere is there dirt or stench, puddle or hog wallow, neglect, disorder, or lack of trimness and neatness. The roads, the streets, the dwellings, the people, the clothes, their neatness extends to everything that falls under the eye. It is the tidiest country in the world, and very much the tidiest too. The question came up, where do poor live? No answer was arrived at. Therefore, we agreed to leave this conundrum for future statesmen to wrangle over. Take any road you please. You may depend upon it, you will not stay in it half a mile. You are usually paid for your trouble, consequently. Your walk inland always turns out to be one of the most crooked, involved, purposeless, and interesting experiences a body can imagine. And by your way is along the sea edge, and you may look down a fathom or two through the transparent water and watch the diamond-like flash and play of the light upon the rocks and sands on the bottom until you're tired of it, if you are so constituted as to be able to get tired of it. There are several sights in Bermuda, of course, but they are easily avoided. This is a great advantage one cannot have in Europe. Bermuda is the right country for a jaded man to loaf in. There are no harassments. The deep peace and quiet of the country sink into one's body and bones and gives his conscience a rest, and chloroform the legion of invisible small devils that are always trying to whitewash his hair.
On one of the 365 islets that group about the Happy Isle was an aquarium. As it used to be a storehouse for powder and other food, for guns and cannon, it was all the more picturesque as a house for fish. The fish in the aquarium were very wonderful in their coloring and form. It was a beautiful Sunday morning, and the sun brought out all sorts of unexpected lights on the water. There were four-eyed fish and squirrelfish and parrotfish, and I don't know how many other kinds of streaked and barred and polka-dotted curiosities. But the kind that Mr. Clemens picked out as his favorite was the angelfish. They were plump and had fins like wings, and were gorgeous in their coloring, and had pretty little pursed-up mouths that suggested maidenly modesty. Their wings suggested spirituality, and their coloring femininity. These traits appealed especially to Mr. Clemens. And not long after, Mr. Clemens' aquarium was established. In this aquarium there were to be none but angelfish admitted. To be an angelfish, one must be a girl, and one must be young, and one must have won Mr. Clemens' heart. The latter was not hard to do, for he always made the overtures when he first met or saw any promising candidate. Another very special Bermuda event for Twain was his visit in 1908 to the Crystal Cave. He had heard of the feats of Carl Gibbons and Edgar Hollis, two teenage boys searching thoroughly for a lost cricket ball hit very hard, had accidentally discovered a deep hole. They explored it in the hope of finding the ball. What they discovered was a scintillating natural wonder that was to have major repercussions on Bermuda's tourism industry, the Crystal Cave in Hamilton Parish. Bernard Wilkinson, the 14-year-old son of the owner of the land, was lowered into the hole by his father using a strong rope tied to a tree. Bernard descended 140 feet with a lamp from a bicycle to light his way. What he found was beyond his or anyone's wildest dreams. It was an underground world of delicate splendor, with magnificent crystal formations of every size and shape, surrounding a clear lake 55 feet deep. It was opened to the public 3 years later. Twain was likely the very first visitor to see the profusion of pristine white stalactites, soda straws, and halactite formations above the cave. Mr. Clemens cared nothing for the excursions that were sometimes proposed to visit some object of interest. He used to say that he had probably seen the oldest house in the world, the longest street, the biggest city, the most wonderful cathedral, the highest mountain. So why should he bother himself now, in his old age, to see second-rate curiosities? So he showed no interest in crystal caves, no natural bridges, no coral gardens, but he loved to sit on the veranda and drink in the changing beauty of sky and sea, or to take long drives under cedar arches or over palm-shaded roads that ended suddenly in the surf.
Do not tell fish stories where the people know you, but particularly don't tell them where They know the fish. You talk about happy creatures. Did you ever notice a porpoise? Well, there ain't anything in heaven superior to that happiness. A flash so sudden and so astonishingly brilliant that it would make you catch your breath. Then that blotch of light would instantly extend itself and take the corkscrew-shaped, imposing length of the fabled sea serpent, with every curve of its body and the break spreading away from its head, and the wake following behind its tail, clothed in a fierce splendor of living fire. And my, but it was coming at a lightning gait. Almost before you could think, this monster of light, 50 feet long, would go flaming and storming by and suddenly disappear. And out in the distance whence it came, you would see another flash, and another, and another, and see them turning to sea serpents on the instant. A swarm of wiggling curves, a moving conflagration, a vision of bewildering beauty, a spectacle of fire and energy whose equal most people will not see again until they are dead. It was porpoises aglow with phosphorescent light. And there they played for an hour, leaping and frolicking and carrying on, turning somersaults, and there were porpoises of ordinary length, but every twist of their bodies sent a long procession of united and glowing curves astern. That fiery jumble was an enchanting thing to look at, and we stayed out of the performance. One cannot have such a show as that twice in a lifetime. The porpoise is the kitten of the sea. He never has a serious thought. He cares for nothing but fun and play. But I think I never saw him at his winsomest until that night. It was near a center of civilization, and he could have been drinking. The early twilight of a Sunday evening in Hamilton, Bermuda, is an alluring time. There is just enough of whispering breeze, fragrance of flowers, and sense of repose to raise one's thoughts heavenward, and just enough amateur piano music to keep him reminded of the other place. There are many venerable pianos in Hamilton, and they all play at twilight. Age enlarges and enriches the powers of some musical instruments, notably the violin, but it seems to set a piano's teeth on edge. Most of the music in vogue there is the same that those pianos prattled in their innocent infancy, and there is something very pathetic about it when they go over it now, in their asthmatic second childhood, dropping a note here and there where a tooth is gone. You ought to be here now. The weather is divine, and you know what it is to drive along the North Shore in such weather and watch the sun paint the waters. We had that happiness today. The joy of it never stales. There are no newspapers, no telegrams, no mobiles, no trolleys, no trains, no tramps, no railways, no theaters, no noise, no lectures, no riots, no murders, no fires, no burglaries, no politics, no offenses of any kind, no follies but church, and I don't go there. I think I could live here always and be contented. A few days among the breezy groves, the flower gardens, the coral caves, and the lovely vistas of blue water that went curving in and out, disappearing, and anon again appearing through the jungle walls of brilliant foliage, restored the energies dulled by long drowsing on the ocean, and fitted us for our final cruise, our little run of 1,000 miles to New York and home. You can go to heaven if you like. I'll stay right here in Bermuda.